My presentation is on genetic engineering, specifically whether designer babies are ethical or not. So what is genetic engineering? Simply put, genetic engineering is changing pre-existing DNA to express a desired trait. This can range anywhere from artificial selection, in which certain organisms with certain traits are mated together to create a desired organism, to actually changing the DNA of a person using more advanced technology. We are specifically going to look into the ethicality of designer babies. A designer baby is a baby genetically engineered for specifically selected traits, which can vary from lower disease risk to gender selection. With the advancement of certain technologies and better understanding of how DNA works, it is now possible to change an embryo's DNA to express traits desired by the parents. So how does genetically engineering a designer baby work? The process begins with something called in vitro fertilization, which is basically fertilization outside of the womb. It is when an embryo's conception occurs in a test tube. The DNA inside the embryo can then be changed with the help of a protein called CRISPR, which stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. Basically, what CRISPR does is cut out certain parts of the DNA and replace it with desired DNA, creating something called recombinant DNA. Thus, the embryo will develop with the traits given through the CRISPR protein. About 1 to 2% of all babies born in the United States are born through in vitro fertilization. This is equivalent to about 4 million babies. This means that the possibility for genetically engineering an embryo is greater because of the increase in the use of in vitro fertilization. Genetic engineering has come a long way, especially since DNA is a relatively new concept to scientists. In 1972, the first recombinant DNA was created. This was not inside a human being, but rather in a bacteria. In 1981, the first transgenic animal was created. It was a combination of mouse and rabbit DNA. This process marks the first time recombinant DNA was created inside a more complex eukaryotic organism. Not long after that, in 1982, the first genetically engineered drug for humans was approved. The drug was a type of insulin used to treat diabetes. In 2012, the discovery of CRISPR was revolutionary. This protein was able to cut any part of a strand of DNA and replace it. It quickly led to more advanced genetic engineering methods. Then, in 2018, human trials using CRISPR were approved. Note that human trials does not mean embryonic trials. Later on in 2018, a man named He Jiankui claimed to have genetically modified embryos. This next video goes more in depth about the work of He Jiankui. It talks about what he did as well as different aspects of genetic engineering.
A Chinese researcher claims to have helped make the world's first gene-edited babies, twin girls whose DNA he says he altered, with a powerful new tool that lets scientists edit the genetic code.
I feel a strong responsibility that it's not just to make it first, but also make it as example.
Scientist He Jiankui says he edited the baby's genes to try to give them a trait few people naturally have, to help them resist HIV infection. His work has not yet been independently confirmed or reviewed by other scientists. But if proven, it crosses a new frontier in medicine and ethics.
If it's not safe or have any problem, it may ruin the entire field, and the people may lose trust in the new technology.
He says he edited embryos for 7 couples during IVF fertility treatment. So far, there's been 1 pregnancy. The gene editing was done using a tool called CRISPR-Cas9. It works by making a cut in the DNA to disable a specific gene. Dr. Kiran Musunuru, an expert with no role in the experiment, considers it unethical.
We still have a lot of work to do to prove and establish that the procedure is actually safe. I would say that no babies should be born at this point in time following the use of this technology. It's simply too early, too premature.
He and many mainstream scientists say this type of gene editing should not be attempted yet, because it could make permanent changes to DNA that could affect future generations, or cause harm if other genes are affected. Some worry it will be used to design babies with desired traits.
We have to balance the potential benefits with the potential risks for the people involved. in cases where the potential risks are substantially higher than the benefits, which I think is the case here, that is not ethical.
Gene editing has only recently been tried in adults to treat serious diseases, and those changes are just in that person. It's not allowed to be used in the U.S. and many other countries on embryos intended for pregnancy. But He says it's only a matter of time.
The world has moved on to the stage for embryo gene editing. There will be someone somewhere who's doing this. If it's not me, it's someone else.
He says he supports the development of international guidelines on how to use this gene editing technology, saying in the end, society will decide how to move forward.
There are many arguments for and against genetically engineering embryos to gain desired traits. One of the arguments for genetic engineering, and arguably the most important, is the possibility of lowering or preventing genetic diseases. This is one of the most controversial aspects of genetic engineering babies. This is what He Jiankui did. He lowered the risk of HIV in 2 girls. The other arguments deal more with the rights of the parents. One argument says that the parents have the right to prenatal autonomy, meaning that parents have the right to choose what their kids turn out to be like. Another argument says that parents already, in some way, choose traits that a child will have by raising them in certain environments. The use of genetic engineering is just another level of choosing traits. Arguments against genetic engineering include unknown possible consequences of altering genes, heritable alterations, and eugenic alterations. Because genetic engineering is such a new field, it is uncertain what kinds of consequences there might be in the future. And because all these alterations are in the DNA, they will be passed down from generation to generation. Eugenic alteration means that genetic engineering might lead to the creation of a super baby. Additionally, designer babies would divide the rich and the poor physically. Only the rich would be able to afford genetic alterations to the embryo, and so a gap between the rich and poor would not only occur economically, it would also occur physically. So what does the world say about this? In 1994, the Council of Ethical and Judicial Affairs supported the idea of using genetic engineering to prevent or cure diseases, but not for benign characteristics such as eye color or height. Then in 2018, human trials with CRISPR, the tool used for genetic engineering, were approved. As of now, the use of embryonic alteration is not legal, but with the current technological advancements and trends, it is likely that designer babies will be showing up soon. So what do Christians say about this? Sharon Sudarsono, a leader at my church, is against it. She says, off the bat, I'd say I'm against it. It doesn't feel right to create and manipulate the process of creation. But what does the Bible say? In Psalm 139, verses 13 to 16, it says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." It basically says that God is the one who created us. He knew who we were before we were born. Again, in Jeremiah 1 verse 5, it says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." God knew each and every one of us before we were born, and He had a plan for us before we were born. So what conclusions can we make from this? We can conclude that genetic engineering embryos is unethical. God knew us and set us apart before we were born. Who are we to get in the way of that? H. Cunningham says that germline manipulation seems to regard the child as a product that can be improved upon rather than a gift from God. What is often lost in these dilemmas is the humanity of the disabled, their personhood, and the reality that they are also bearers of the image of God. Similarly, Francis Collins says that if genomes are being altered to suit parents' preferences, do children become more like commodities than precious gifts? Both these quotes make us realize that there is a person inside every embryo, not just something that can be changed and modified to fit our tastes. Babies are a gift from God, and diseased or not, they are human, with life and feeling and purpose. It is not our right to change that. As I said before, genetically engineering the DNA of an embryo has unknown and permanent consequences. They can't be changed, and the consequences aren't well known yet since there haven't been any tests. So my ethical challenge is to not try to control things outside of your reach. Leave the things that God does to God. We can only control our actions and our thoughts, so let's try our best to do that. Let's also strive to see everyone as perfectly made in the image of God. When we talk about genetic engineering and design our babies, it can be hard to see that each and every person, disabilities or not, is made in the image of God. When we try to change that through genetic engineering, we turn people into our idea of what normal is. But our idea of normal is not God's idea of normal. So let's try to see things through the lens of God.